Okay, it looks like we are live. Awesome. So, hello to everybody who's watching on YouTube. We're super stoked to have everyone. Let's go ahead and get started with some introductions. Evan, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, definitely. So, hello everyone. My name is Evan, and I am a PhD student at the University of Chicago studying vertebrate paleontology. For my research, I specialize in the feeding behavior and functional morphology of meat eating theropod dinosaurs like T Rex, Spinosaurus, and Allosaurus.
Super awesome. And I'm the Vividen. You might know who I am. I'm a biology and geology student at Southern Utah University. I'm working on getting into grad schools right now, and YouTube is a fun hobby of mine. So that's me. I'm pretty boring. I'm not as cool as Evan. So we have a bit of an agenda that we're going to talk about today. We're going to cover kind of some of Evan's work, what he's done, what it's like being a paleontologist and an author. I don't know if any of you have seen, he wrote the book Dinosaur World, which looks super cool. I still have to get a copy of it, but I feel like I kind of need to now. Looks awesome. And then after we cover our main talking points, we're going to have a Q&A. And of course, if you have questions throughout the live stream, you can just go ahead and pop them in the chat, and we can talk about those as we go. So let's go ahead and start out with your origin story, Evan. What got you into paleontology, and how did you get to where you are now as a doctorate student?
Yeah, so growing up, paleontology was part of my life. When I was in preschool, I would always throw a tantrum when my mom dropped me off because I didn't want her to go and everything. So one day when she dropped me off at preschool, she looked at the viewing window. She still saw me throw a tantrum, but she noticed that the my classmates consoled me with dinosaur toys, and I calmed down immediately. So every day when she would drop me off at preschool, she would leave me a dinosaur toy to play with. And from that point on, she must have realized, oh, I guess Evan likes dinosaurs. And she would continue this experiment along with my grandmother for my birthday and Christmas, whether it was another dinosaur toy or dinosaur book or video. And I would just be completely enamored by it. And I remember looking at one of my dinosaur books and I saw this particular word, paleontologist, and it was a scientist who studies prehistoric life, including dinosaurs. And I would continue to feed this hobby by visiting museums like the Field Museum, watching videos like The Walk with Dinosaurs, Jurassic Park, Land Before Time, and not to mention also attending volunteer work at the Field Museum, such as the Evolving Planet, working at the Geology Department, weighing meteorite specimens, and also participating in Project Exploration, an organization that was founded by Dr. Paul Sereno and Gabrielle Lyon. And so during my undergraduate, I studied under Dr. Kinshu Shimada, where I mostly focused on fossil fish paleontology. Even though I was a dinosaur person, I thought it was more important to at least have a foundation in doing paleontological research, however. And following this for my master's, I was able to study under Dr. Eric Snively at Oklahoma State University, looking at the feeding behavior of tyrannosaurs. And now, for my PhD, I'm currently looking at the functional morphology of other theropod dinosaurs, usually through a combination of finite element analysis or morphometrics. So, finite element analysis is kind of like a stress strain simulator where we can take a digital model of a dinosaur skull and apply jaw muscle forces at areas of attachment sites and also apply constraints at the tooth and jaw joint to see how well the skull responds to high forces, where red indicates high stress and blue indicates low stress. And with morphometrics, it's more of a quantitative statistical analysis, where we're able to apply points or landmarks onto a biological object, such as the skull or maybe the cervical vertebrae or backbone or neck vertebrae, and more so to see if there is any correlation between shape, however, and morphology. And in doing so, it can act as a statistical organizer.
It's pretty incredible stuff. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Out of, since you've been working in that for multiple years, are there any dinosaurs in particular that you have been able to work with personally that just were really extraordinary in terms of how morphometrically odd they were?
So I will say one thing that I actually have only started getting into morphometrics, however, but for my master's, I did use finite element analysis. But there is one group that I'm particularly very fond of studying, and I'm glad I got a chance to study this group, were the tyrannosaurs. I remember when I was a docent for the Field Museum giving talks about Sioux, and one book that I always was fascinated with was Dave Hone's The Tyrannosaur Chronicles. And in the book, it talked about the different tyrannosauroids and also the feeding behavior and functional morphology of T Rex. But one thing that always caught my attention was that we have a variety of tyrannosauroids ranging from D-Long, Guanlong, Alioramus, and Teratophonius that's kind of like, has anyone ever done a broad bite force analysis of Tyrannosaurus? And so during my master's, I basically had to spend a lot of time trying to see which museum had casts or specimens of different tyrannosauroids. And then of course COVID happened, but because of the digital age, however, we were able to use like already scanned models, however. And in doing so, we were able to provide a framework of the evolution of feeding behavior of a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Clandestine clade of dinosaurs, or a very popular clade.
Yeah, it's hard to get more popular than tyrannosaurs, that's for sure.
That is true, but another group of theropods that I was initially wanted to study were also the ceratosaurs. So the short-faced abylosaurs like Majungasaurus and Carnotaurus, and even Ceratosaurus. But one thing that Dr. Paul Sereno is working on is, of course, Spinosaurus. And I kind of felt like, well, people have talked about the locomotive behaviors of Spinosaurus, but never its feeding behavior, though. So let's see what we can do if we use FVA for that. But I don't want to spoil too many details just yet, however. Stay tuned for SVP.
Yeah, and that'll be in the middle of October, right?
Yes.
Awesome. So yeah, everybody in the chat, make sure to keep an eye out for when Evan's paper on Spinosaurus feeding behavior comes out. I think it's going to be really, really cool.
Thank you.
Awesome. And of course, I have to ask this question. It's cheesy, but it's obligatory. What is your favorite dinosaur?
My favorite dinosaur has and always will be Tyrannosaurus. This has been a theropod that has defined not only my paleontological career, but also the career of a lot of other paleontologists. And I probably would not have been able to meet other paleontologists like Doctors Thomas Holt, Steve Brusati, Dr. Snively, Thomas Carr, who all specialize in the anatomy, phylogeny, and also geography of this particular dinosaur. And not to mention, when I gave talks about suited T-Rex, however, it was always just like the one dinosaur that always gave a smile on my face, because it's like, this is the ultimate predator, the ultimate living animal on this planet, though. And I may be biased toward theropods, but I think my second favorite dinosaur would have to be Spinosaurus, because it's kind of like I always gain interest in particular dinosaurs that I study, and Spinosaurus is slowly getting up there. It's still at number 2. It hasn't hit number 1 yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if another group like, say, the Abylosaurs came in and took number 2 spot.
Yeah, I mean, Abylosaurs just seem to be getting more and more interesting, especially ecologically, with all those new discoveries about their presence in Morocco and the Indian subcontinent. Like, they were in a lot of places doing a lot of things.
Yeah, it's very unique, however. And not only that, but they were still able to maintain a very successful niche, too, because you always think about like how Ceratosaurus just lived alongside Allosaurus and Torvosaurus, which is kind of like seen as like the bottom of the barrel, but it was still able to survive in its own environment, and even was able to produce new relatives that were able to have unique morphological variation, but also occupy a different niche, however, especially amongst the large allosaurids, and probably had to compete with the megaraptorans too. But it's still a very unique group of theropod dinosaurs.
For sure. Looks like we've got our first question, actually. Just go ahead and pop that up on the screen. From Burba, please ask him, would X-Rex Edmontosaurus beat Sioux? So I'm not familiar with X-Rex Edmontosaurus. Evan, do you know what that is?
I do not. I think they're probably referring to more to like how paleontologists have always talked about like how big some of the dinosaurs would have gotten, and it is true that Edmontosaurus probably would have been bigger than a fully grown T-Rex, however. And it's something more like large theropods or large carnivores would not want to hunt a large, healthy adult, however. And Edmontosaurus can actually reach gigantic proportions, however. It's probably one of those moments where it's kind of like, do I dare tempt fate? No, I'd rather not. Because it's kind of like, would you want to mess with a horse?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They're, like, you know, maybe if it came down to the bitter end and there was absolutely no recourse, a T-Rex would attack that sort of thing, but it's certainly not their first choice or even second or third.
Yeah, and it's one of those moments where it's kind of like large predators will go after either the young or sick, however.
Hmm.
And it's one of those moments where it's kind of like, yeah, some of the herbivorous dinosaurs that T-Rex would have fed on were probably mostly just more like younger individuals, however. But a full-grown adult Edmontosaurus would probably just fight back completely, however. It probably would have started to like size up, however, use its tail and probably would have stand on its hind legs too.
Yeah, that would be a terrifying intimidation display. An herbivore that big,
Mm-hmm.
or like Shantungosaurus against
Oh,
Zushing tyrannus, the same thing, but even more extreme.
yeah, definitely. Or even like Alamosaurus too. That's an even more extreme
Yeah.
case.
I mean, I love the idea of a pack of T Rexes hunting down an Alamosaurus, but it's pretty unlikely that that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, looks like we already got another question. People are just popping in. It's from Tyrannosaurus Rex itself. Wow, I can talk.
Yeah.
So, Evan, what theropod do you give the title of the largest theropod to?
Hold on one second. Let me just turn the air on real quick. It's kind of hot where I'm at right now.
No worries.
Okay, so title of the largest theropod. So growing up, I always thought that Spinosaurus was the largest, but as I got older, it turns out that largest is kind of more of like a very loose word, however. So in terms of the longest, that would go to Spinosaurus, however. But in terms of largest, we kind of use it more like as a mass estimate, however. So the largest is still going to be T-Rex, however. And plus, in one of your videos, you also talked about the approximate size of some of these theropods. So, like, T Rex could probably reach a body mass of like up to 9 or maybe 10 tons, however. And so it's still one of those impressive factors where it's like T Rex is still the king, however, even though it is outclassed by a bunch of other long mega carnivores too, like Spinosaurus and Giganotosaurus.
Yep, I think that's a fantastic answer, and that's pretty much exactly what I would have said as well. Awesome. Okay, let's see. So it looks like the next item on our agenda is specialties in the field. So you mentioned that, you're definitely a theropod guy, and that's awesome. I'm a theropod guy too. Big fan of, the biggest terrestrial predators that ever existed. Um, what would you say is what are some of your theropods, some of your favorite theropods that should get more recognition in the media?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think probably that would probably be the Spinosaurus and also the Abelisaurus and maybe even the Allosaurus, however, in terms of hypercarnivorous theropods, in terms of media, however. Because when everyone thinks about Spinosaurus, they immediately think about Spinosaurus, however, but Spinosaurus has always been the poster child for Spinosauridae. If you were to ask me what would be the best Spinosaurid of the group, it would probably have to be Suchomimus, the large crocodile mimic from the early Cretaceous period of northern Africa. Allosauroids, there's always going to be like that one comment saying that like large allosaurs like Giganotosaurus, Carcharodontosaurus, and Maposaurus, they all look alike, however, but they do have a lot of different morphological differences amongst the clade, however. Like Giga is more deeply robust skulled, however. Carcharodontosaurus is more slender and gracile, however, and Maposaurus, it's like a good in-between. And the Abelisaurs, besides Carnotaurus, there are a few other Abelisaurs that are just very unique and bizarre, like Majungasaurus and Rugops, however. But I think the one group that I think is that I'm glad Jurassic World Dominion did do, herbivorous theropods. So like Dinochirus and
Yeah.
Therizinosaurus. And like it's one of those moments where it's kind of like, oh yeah, Oviraptor, but go for the really big ones. Like when Jurassic World Dominion showed off Therizinosaurus, I was like, are they really going to show off Therizinosaurus? And it did not disappoint. It's everything that it really should have been. Large, territorial, aggressive, a herbivore, everything in the right manner.
Yeah, I personally wasn't the biggest fan of Dominion from a narrative standpoint, but I'm really glad that they included a lot of more obscure species. Like Therizinosaurus was a highlight of the movie for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Dinochirus would probably be another fantastic addition to Heifer because it's just so bizarre too.
Yeah, giant killer croco duck thing. It
I
was
go with
awesome.
Platypus Bear.
Yeah, platypus bear from Avatar. Yeah, those. Oh man, Dinochirids were just so weird.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, looks like we've got a comment from Burbaugh. Looks like we want some feedback on that. Looks like, yeah, I believe in the Giga versus T-Rex. T-Rex would win. Of course, it's built for battle, but Giga is more of a scavenger.
Hmm. Yeah, so the one thing that everyone always will talk about is that was this theropod or carnivore more of an obligate scavenger? The thing is that all predators will either hunt prey or they'll also come across a carcass, however. So it's kind of more like Giga and T-Rex. They both probably would have been occupying different niches, however, but if they were both in the same environment, however, they would probably do whatever they can to avoid direct conflict, however.
Yeah, I think that goes for pretty much any predator, really. They're not going to turn down free food,
Yeah,
but that doesn't mean that they're an obligate scavenger.
right.
I'm sure everybody here has heard about the whole Jack Horner T-Rex is an obligate scavenger thing that got debunked like 30 years ago. I mean, for goodness sake, we have preserved bite marks that healed over from prey items, showing that it did attempt to attack living animals. So,
Oh, definitely.
yeah, I'm sure that just like T-Rex, the Giga wouldn't have turned down a free Happy Meal,
Hmm.
but it probably did engage in quite a bit of active pursuit predation as well.
Right.
Looks like we got another question. Was Deinonychus a pack hunter, and what are its known prey items?
Wow, Deinonychus. That is another really unique theropod. So, one thing about Deinonychus is that when John Ostrom had found this big quarry of Deinonychus bones along with a Tyrannosaurus, they immediately assumed that it was a pack hunter, and that was the main trick with the Dromaeosaurs and Raptors, however. Now, one thing about it is that even though we can make 3D scans of dinosaur brains, however, we can't really tell if it's like an indicator for, let's say, intelligence or also for coordination, however. The one hypothesis that everyone goes with, and it's more like a safe hypothesis, is more like it probably would have been more like mob behavior. So they probably came across a carcass or maybe a dead animal that was on the verge of dying, and they all came across it and just fed on the carcass. It's kind of like what Komodo dragons do. Komodo dragons will feed on a carcass and it'll all come like in big mobs, more like in a big free for all, however. Now, in terms of its prey items, so when paleontologists found the big Tyrannosaurus, they immediately thought that like, oh, Deinonychus would have fed on Tyrannosaurus actively. It's still kind of more along the line of, let's say, a wolf versus a moose or an elk. However, a single Deinonychus would probably struggle a lot against a full-grown, healthy adult Tyrannosaurus, but it probably would have fed more on like juvenile specimens or maybe even smaller vertebrates too. However.
Man, that is a terrifying image. The idea of a bunch of theropods mobbing like piranhas or Komodo dragons. I'd love to see it, but I'd hate to be there.
Yeah, it would just be one of those. It would probably be one of those moments where it's kind of like I just saw videos of Komodo dragons feeding. It's impressive, but also it's just more like nightmare fuel.
Yeah, nightmare fuel is a great term for it. Super cool, but not something you want to have to go through.
Right.
Awesome. It looks like we have a really nice comment here. It's not a question, but I think it's worth highlighting. From Professor Crooks. Evan, you encourage me as a fellow black paleo enthusiast. That's awesome.
Thank you very much.
And then we've got another question from T-Rex again. Where did you get that Tyrannosaurus skull?
Yeah, so this skull was a 3D printed model that was made by Dr. Ian Brown of OSU, or Oklahoma State University Center for Health Sciences. I was giving a poster presentation on inferring the abdominal and cranial arteries of T-Rex and also in comparison with that of crocodilians and also birds, however. And so one thing that we did do was that we had like a 3D printed cast models of a T-Rex skull, a chicken skull, also an alligator skull, just more for like a visual display, however.
That's awesome. I don't suppose he'd make those commercially?
So this skull model was actually derived from the Smithsonian's Nation's T-Rex from DC, however. But I know the Smithsonian, they do actually have like 3D models of the nation's T-Rex, however. So you probably would have to get in contact with a 3D printing facility, though.
Okay, but they probably have like the STL files online for that.
Yes, yes, they do.
Awesome. Looks like we've got another Carcharodontosaurid question. On the topic of Carcharodontosaurids, how do you think large Carcharodontosaurids like Carcharodontosaurus and Gigantosaurus would feed?
So usually I do, of course, refer to a lot of visual media. So like there's Planet Dinosaur, and then there's also a couple of papers. So one thing is that we do take a look at the cranial and also dental morphology. Carcharodontosaurs had mostly flattened saw-like teeth, so they were more adapted for slicing flesh off the bone, however. And in one instance in Planet Dinosaur, you actually do see like the Mapusaurus feed on the just basically like just strip off the flesh from the Argentinosaurus, however. So in terms of like Carcharodontosaurus, they probably would have been just more like gradually taking bites out of its prey, however, instead of just going for like a quick, slow, gripping bite, however, like that of T-Rex or maybe even Majungasaurus.
Yeah, I don't remember who commented this, but I saw a comment a few days ago where someone was comparing Carcharodontosaurs to like the assassin build in a video game, and Tyrannosaurs were the brawler build, where they're
Yeah,
both really effective. They're good at doing different things.
oh, definitely, yes. In fact, there was even like I believe it was a 2015 study that was done by Don Henderson where he was trying to figure out like how much weight Carcharodontosaurus could have lifted, however, and it was very surprising though. But I can't remember the exact metrics, however, but Carcharodontosaurus could probably lift like a juvenile titanosaur very easily with its powerful neck muscles though.
Yeah,
But
I think I remember reading that study actually. I think it was between like 300 and 500 kilograms just with their neck
yeah,
muscles.
yeah, and the thing is that one thing that's also caught my attention is also the neck, however. Every paleontologist has focused on the skull of theropods, but not so much the neck, however. So you can probably think of the neck as kind of more like a special organ or sorry, appendage, however. So you can probably take a look at the cervical morphology and also think about where the neck muscles would have been inserted and based on the length and volume, however.
Yeah, and I'm sure that follows the morphology based on what their specific diet and hunting strategy was.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so next question is going to be one from me. I'm super curious about this. How was it like publishing a book while working in paleontology?
Yeah, so this was after when I had graduated from Oklahoma State University when I got my master's. And so I was approached by the publishers where they had asked me if I wanted to write a dinosaur book, and I said yes. And the details involving the book would involve a written description of every dinosaur that was discovered. And that was a very monumental task, but I was able to, for one thing, come up with like, okay, let's find all these dinosaurs. Let's organize them based on their phylogenetic classification. So theropod, marginal cephalian, sauropod, ornithopod, etc. And then also talk about some of their essential facts, however. At first, I was going to give an essential fact for every dinosaur, but it kind of would have been more like grasping at straws, however, especially with the
Yeah.
nomen dubiums, however. So it was at that point where I decided to just say, okay, I'll do an essential facts for every well-known dinosaur, but also some that are very much obscure or slowly getting into the pop culture medium, however.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's an awesome list.
Yeah. And one thing that I was actually very proud of about Dinosaur World was talking about the dinosaur biology. So most books will just typically talk about just like the dinosaurs that have been found, however, but there's very few that do talk about like let's say dinosaur biology though. And I had to refer to like a lot of literature that was on dinosaur feeding, neuroanatomy, histology, and also color too. So we're able to provide basically a summary of most of what science has done in dinosaur paleontology. And plus, another thing too was also talking about the paleontologists who study dinosaurs and even museums that also have dinosaur fossils too. Because there's a few that I actually did not even know about until I started like looking some more research, however.
Yeah, I don't think there's any better way to learn than to try to teach other people.
Yeah, and I think the best part about Dinosaur World is that it'll probably have a lot of readers probably look more into where some museums are having dinosaur bones, especially like outside the US. Like there's a
Mhm.
few kind of more like obscure museums. Like there's the Burpee Museum. I didn't even really know about that until I heard about Jane, however, and also PaleoFest, which was a really fantastic museum, and I felt like a good spotlight for them. There's also the Alp Museum, which has a lot of casts and also material from parts of Utah and New Mexico. And not to mention the paleontologist section, where we mostly wanted to focus a lot on upcoming paleontologists or also people of color, too.
Yeah, exactly. Make sure that everybody gets included in that science. That's awesome. It looks like our next question is from the Wild Duo. How do you think Spinosaurus walked?
Oh
Hot
boy.
topic.
Oh boy. So Um, I'm tr- I'm going to do my best to not really pick a side, however, because I mostly focus on feeding, however. But the way I kind of envision Spinosaurus would probably be more like a shoreline predator, however. I'm not going to talk about how it's home walking or anything, but more based on like how fossils have been found and just based on what we can tell about its other parts of its anatomy, however. So we can probably take a look at living relatives, so like birds, which are kind of like herons. There's also been a new study done on irritator, where they found that irritator would have mostly had its snout held downward, however, and also would have had its head or neck pointing in a more downward direction, though. So more akin to that of a heron. So based on this, we can probably infer that Spinosaurus probably would have been more like a shoreline predator, however. But I won't talk. But that's all I'll say. That's all I'll say right there. I'm not going too far with that.
I think that's fair. That's a pretty controversial topic.
Yes, definitely. And it's just like, I'll focus on the feeding. I'm not going to talk about the
Yeah.
locomotion of it.
Yeah. Okay, looks like we got another question about. Ooh, this one's going to be interesting. What do you think about how T-Rex and other theropods sounded like?
Oh, this will be a fun one. Let me just drink my water first.
Oh, I'll join you.
So one thing about theropods is that they don't have a larynx, so they can't really roar like in Jurassic Park, but they would have made a very guttural quack or hissing sound. And it's a good thing I also have my T-Rex skull right here. So 1, 2, 3.
Oh, for a second I thought you were playing a recording, and then I realized that was you making those noises. That was really impressive.
Thank you very much. And the one thing is that like you basically have to like suck in your diaphragm doing that, however. So like a very guttural exhale.
Yep, to make the kind of noises that they would have made without a larynx.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I think that would be way more intimidating, like than the Jurassic Park mammalian style roar, but just to hear like this coming
Oh,
up behind you.
definitely. Yeah, and plus would have made like very deep hooting sounds. So, like
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's like a horror video game material right there. Terrifying. Alexius, is the 15-ton Deinosuchus thing true, or is it more a biggest theoretical possible specimen? Also, T-Rex versus Deinosuchus, who would win?
oh, that's an interesting one. I don't think I've ever heard of the 15-ton Dinosuchus, however. But in terms of T-Rex versus Dinosuchus, it's one of those moments where it's kind of like, okay, it's similar to like how when people talked about T-Rex versus Spinosaurus when Spinosaurus was thought to be an aquatic predator, however. If it's on the land, T-Rex wins. If it's in the water, Dinosuchus wins, however. It's kind of similar to that of like lions versus crocs, however. It's going to be more based on like who has the best terrestrial or aquatic advantage.
Yep,
Or
very much a terrain-dependent situation.
right. Yeah, definitely. And plus, I'm not sure. I don't think anyone has actually done the bite force on Dinosuchus. I could be wrong on that, however, but I probably feel like maybe Dinosuchus probably would have had like a very similar bite force as that of T-Rex. I know Purosaurus is massive, however, and that's terrifying.
I feel like I recently read a bite force study that included Deinosuchus. I think it was from like the past 5 years or so, and it ended up being close to 100,000 newtons.
Wow.
So pretty nuts, almost double that of T-Rex.
Yeah, terrifying too.
That is terrifying. That's like comparable to Megalodon. Right, Pokesaurus, awesome. Pokesaurus is a long time stay in one of the mods on the channel. Actually, what would be the smallest animal an adult Tyrannosaurus would feasibly hunt?
So one thing I would probably like to mention is that Tyrannosaurus underwent niche partitioning, so it's kind of more like leveling up in an RPG game. So imagine, if you would, a baby T-Rex no bigger than that of, like, say, a beagle, or probably like or maybe like a medium-sized dog, however. The smallest thing that it would have probably hunted would have been like smaller animals, so like lizards, rodents. But a full-grown adult T-Rex, probably would have hunted more like Canagnathids, like Anzu, Dromaeosaurs, probably something more like that, or maybe even juvenile ceratopsians and also Montosaurus too.
Yep. So, not every meal that it had to eat would have been as big as it was. I'm
Right.
sure it just would have snacked on anything that it could while it was in between giant meals.
Yep.
Okay, so I know you're not necessarily a sauropod guy, but it looks like we got a sauropod question. What do you think of the Greg Paul Bruhathchaeosaurus, referring to that 2023 study that just came out?
Oh yeah, I heard about that. I haven't had the chance to read it, however, but Bruhov is it Bruhov?
Yeah, Bruhathchaeosaurus. I
Okay,
think it's Sanskrit, so I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
yeah, Bruhov. That is a very weird sauropod, and it's kind of like a big can of worms. However, the one
Yeah.
thing I will definitely say about Bruhov is that we originally I know that the paleontologists they did have the original material, but I know it was in really bad state. However, like the bones were about to disintegrate. However, and then of course there's been thoughts about like whether it was a tree or not, but I think there's been back and forth on that. However, but sauropods were able to reach gigantic titanic proportions. However, the thing is that they just kept eating and growing. They never hit a plateau. They just kept on going. Really, there was never a ceiling for them. And I do imagine that Bruchiosaurus, it probably would have surpassed Argentinosaurus, but we just don't know, however. The thing is that sauropods are very fascinating, but they also come with some baggage, especially when it comes to assessing body mass, however, because they're not always complete. And sometimes when you take a look at the biggest one, you gotta think about like how the original material is. It's the same thing with like Marapunisaurus back in the Bone Wars.
Yep, exactly. If you'd asked me like 2 months ago what Bruhathchaeosaurus' status was, I would have told you that it was probably a tree.
Yeah.
But after reading Paul and Larramendi's study on it, it looks like it seems that there's a much more solid case for it being an actual sauropod now, what with
Yeah.
the material being redescribed and actually new photos
Oh,
surfaced of the original
perfect.
material. So it got
Perfect.
redescribed a year ago, and for some reason nobody talked about it. And
Hmm.
then it just only recently exploded in popularity again with that body mass estimation that came out.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so that is good to hear, however. Like Brew of Chaosaurus, it really also goes into more detail about like how we've always been trying to like find dinosaurs in North America, but there are other places that are yielding dinosaurs that are like a treasure trove, however. And the
India has so many cool dinosaurs.
Yeah, and the one thing is that we have to also mention the resources too, however. Resources and also outreach and education. Like I know that there are paleontologists who do field work in India, like there's Jeff Wilson at the University of Michigan Ann Arbor, and also Paul Sereno when he did do field work in India too.
Yep, I think honestly, I was talking with somebody about this the other day. We should just repurpose the military budgets of every country and assign it to paleontology. No more war, just dinosaurs.
or or maybe Dino Wars.
Dino war. Yeah, flashback to the Bone Wars all over again.
Oh boy.
It looks like we got another biomechanics question from Tyrannotherium. That's a cool username, by the way. Tyrant Beast. How fast did T-Rex run? My guess, 15 miles an hour.
So you're a little bit close. When it comes to assessing dinosaur speed, however, it's never going to be that easy, however. The one thing that we normally take a look at is looking at living animals, so birds, however, and also crocodilians. Now, birds, they don't birds still have a tail, but it's become very much reduced, however. And also, crocodilians, they have a special muscle called the caudal femoralis muscle, or in this case, the tail femur muscle. So it would have been attaching onto parts of the ilium or the hip, the femur, and also parts of the tail, however. And that's a muscle that would aid in locomotion. Now, in terms of being able to assess how much it could run, however, T-Rex could run, but it would have accidentally tripped and hurt itself, however. You could say T-Rex was more like a slow stride walker, however. And some paleontologists have also said that T-Rex could only maybe go up like maybe 10 to 12 miles per hour, which is very slow. But most of the other dinosaurs that T-Rex lived with were also very slow too. And there was also a 2020 study by Mike Habib and colleagues, where they found that T-Rex and other tyrannosaurs were more efficient power walkers, so they could really conserve energy while walking because of a special foot bone called the arctometatarsus.
And I hadn't heard about that study.
This was something that I actually came across when I was trying to come up with my thesis and also doing a whole write up. This was something that came out, I think, in 2020 or maybe 2021. It was probably 2020, but Micah B, Alex Achechi, and Thomas Holt, and I think a few more people were more or less assessing like the stride length of Tyrannosaurus, and they found that raptors could probably be more like a fast sprinter because it's so young and graceful and nimble. But as Tyrannosaurus got bigger, however, they started to like transition more from being a gracile runner to more of an efficient power walker. And not to mention, it still wouldn't get tired, however. It could still maintain a very constant pace, too. So
which would be great for like persistence predation, right?
Yeah. So in a way, Jurassic Park was sort of right, really.
I guess when it's going really fast, when its legs are that long, it doesn't need to be, a certain amount of stride lengths per second. It just has to be a few because it's taking so much distance with each footstep. It's still going to cover a lot of distance really quickly.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good biomechanics question right here for you. What is the heaviest weight that a bipedal body plan could support in an animal?
Oh man, that is a very interesting one, and I'm not really the best person to answer for that, however, but in terms of like the heaviest weight, however, there's only one bipedal animal that is currently the heaviest, and that would probably still be T-Rex, however, because it's just so massive, however. And the heaviest a T-Rex was probably like 9 tons, however. So that is still impressive for a bipedal animal, however. Most of the quadrupedal animals also have like stuff that's within like the 30-ton range, however. So having a bipedal animal that can support like 10 tons of weight and muscle is very impressive and still be able to continue walking too. That's an impressive feat of biomechanics and also functional morphology and musculoskeletal anatomy.
Yeah, I think the biggest bipedal animal that I can think of is probably Shantungosaurus, which would
Oh,
push
right.
like 13 to 15 tons.
Yeah,
That one's kind of cheating though, because if I remember correctly, it can also support itself on its forelimbs, which
yeah.
T-Rex obviously couldn't do.
Yeah, I completely forgot it. I completely forgot that hadrosaurs can also be bipedal too, however, so it's kind of still like cheating, but still it's
Kind of a gray area there.
yeah.
Okay, we've got a really, really big can of worms to open with this next question. Looks like Pokesaurus is hinting at what your opinion on Nanotyrannus validity is.
Oh boy. This is probably the third time someone has brought up the whole Nanotyrannus discussion, and the one thing I will probably say is that I still think that Jane is probably a juvenile Tyrannosaurus, however, and we can probably take a look based on like the tooth count and also take a look at parts of the skull, however. I know Jane does not have a complete brain case, however, so we can't really tell like if it's really immature or not, however. But there's still other parts of its anatomy and plus other juvenile tyrannosaurs that we can say like, okay, we can probably say that Jane is definitely a juvenile tyrannosaurus, in my opinion, however. And there's still been like a lot of work done on like histology too, however. Now, if someone were to say that maybe Nanotyrannus is probably like some type of small Alioramin, I'd be happy with that too. But I kind of go with more along the juvenile Tyrannosaurus because there's been like enough evidence done on histology and also taking a look at the sutures too, to just seem like has everything fused up, however.
And it looks like they haven't fused.
So that is one thing that I have noticed about when looking at Jane, however. There's still some parts of Jane's anatomy that haven't really been fused, however, which bone fusion is definitely an indicator that this is now a mature adult, however. And plus, when looking at histology, we can basically just cut open the bones and just see the age of the individual, however. And Jane is very much immature, however, too. And there's also...
Yeah, I mean that seems pretty solid. I tend to stay out of that debate. I know I'm not qualified to put in any sort of final word, but I personally lean towards Jane being a juvenile Tyrannosaurus as well.
Yeah.
Right, another question from Burba. How do you think Nigersaurus survived alongside the Spinosaurus and Carcharodontosaurus?
So Nigersaurus predated Spinosaurus and Carcharodontosaurus, It did share its environment, however, with Suchomimus and Eocarcharia, however. And Nigersaurus would have been more along the line of just like a sauropod that probably would have been prey to Eocarcharia, however, because they're both about the similar size, however. And sauropods, they kind of have a few ways where it's kind of like the Nigersaurus that was described was still just a juvenile specimen, however. It was immature, but it probably would have reached larger sizes though.
Awesome. If there's big theropods around, just get bigger.
That's true.
Seems to be a fairly effective strategy. From Tyrannotherium, were ceratosaurs hunting fish, or did they just hunt terrestrial animals?
I have heard that hypothesis too, that Ceratosaurus would have been more like a semi-aquatic hunter, so it would have been feeding more along like a lake area, feeding fish, however. But one thing I will mention is that theropods had their own specific niche. So Ceratosaurus would have been living more alongside a lake environment, so feeding on fish and other small animals. But when times became more intense, it probably would start feeding on similarly sized prey animals like Stegosaurus and maybe Tenontosaurus and probably juvenile Allosaurus too.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back almost to the same point of like Carcharodontosaurs or Tyrannosaurs being not obligate scavengers, but taking what they could.
Right.
Just because you're not specialized for a particular type of prey doesn't mean that you won't occasionally take it.
Of course.
So yeah, I think that's a great point. What's one theropod you wish was more popular than it is?
Probably Spinosaurus. Assuming that the original remains were not destroyed during World War II and paleontologists could actually properly study them, however. The fact that the original remains were destroyed in World War II and we mostly have been trying to like find bits and pieces and also stuff that have been found through commercial fossil dealing, it's really a very tragic story though. But
Yeah.
assuming that the museum was able to transport the bones in a very safe location, however, away from the bombing raid and following as paleontologists were able to study it, I think Spinosaurus would have started to reach popularity, maybe close to that of T Rex, however. But I do agree, Spinosaurus, if the original remains were not destroyed, they probably would have been very popular, however.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, it's still a pretty popular animal right now, but I agree that if we had just kept the holotype, cultural paleontology would probably look pretty different.
Yes, definitely.
Looks like we have a recommendation from Tyrannosaurus Rex. Not a question, but if you're ever looking into purchasing mass-produced high-grade dinosaur models, PNSO or Howlungud is the way to go.
Okay, thanks. I'll look into that.
Awesome. Yeah, I've seen quite a few of the PNSO models, and
Yeah,
they're really great. Haven't heard of this other brand, but I'm sure they're awesome too.
interesting.
Do you think carnivorous theropods were more feast and famine feeders, or would they hunt a new prey item every day? I think it varies between the different groups.
Yeah, so it's still going more with the whole niche partitioning hypothesis, however. Theropods will feed on a specific prey item that they are more best adapted to, but in some cases where food is very scarce, they will have to leave their environment. They will have to leave their niche and will probably have to look for something else however, ranging from scavenging to also probably defending their kill, however, too.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. We've got a who would win scenario from Heatwave Edits. Who would win, Eotriceratops or T-Rex?
Oh, I haven't heard Eotriceratops in a very long time. That is a very interesting one. So, if it's going to be a fully grown adult Eotriceratops and T Rex, it could go either way, though. T Rex has very good agility and also very high bite force, but it has to clamp onto the Eotriceratops long enough so it doesn't move. But for Eotriceratops, it can probably like ram in and can also like try to dodge attacks too. Not to mention gore T Rex as well.
Yep, it really is just a massive arms race. When both massive animals evolve side by side and they're always trying to kill the other one,
Right.
There's a reason it can go either way. They're both hyper adapted to counter the other one. They're perfect rivals.
That is true.
Although I will say, assuming that it's a fully grown Triceratops, fully grown T-Rex, just statistically, most hunts made by predators fail.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean that the predator dies or receives a grievous injury. It just means that it isn't able to take down the prey item a good chunk of the time.
That is true.
So that's definitely also something to consider. Oh, we got another one from Heatwave Edits. I have a question for all of you. What is your favorite type of ceratopsian?
Your type of ceratopsian. That is a
Huh.
very good one. I have to think about this very carefully. I think I'm probably going to have to go with Pachyrhinosaurus because we have now started to find more Pachyrhinosaurus material. And plus, one thing about Pachyrhinosaurus is that it's very unique compared to the other horn-faced ceratopsians. It has like a very broad, flat, and a thick, thick boss or something.
Yeah, I remember watching the Disney's Dinosaur, the 2000 movie, where
Yeah,
that Pachyrhinosaurus just rams into Aladar.
yeah,
That
that
made
was
a big
really
impact
cool.
on me. That definitely one of my favorites as well.
Yeah,
I'm also a huge fan of Diabloceratops
mhm,
and Cosmoceratops.
good one.
They were actually found really close to where I live, which is just like a fun thing. But also, I think their horn structure is so cool. Diabloceratops with like the extra spikes
Oh
for no
yeah,
reason, just
that's
looking like this Dungeons and Dragons demon. Super awesome.
yeah, that's a really good one.
Okay, Professor Crooks. Here's another hot button topic on T Rex intelligence.
Oh boy, so this is going to be a very so that's another paper that I haven't had the chance to read, but I have been reading more like the abstract and also just some of the general comments. When we take a look at assessing the intelligence of extinct animals, it's not always going to be a very much a one-to-one comparison or going to be very exact, though. The one thing is that we can probably take a look at the of morphology of T-Rex's brain and be able to see like which parts are adapted to what specific features, such as sight, sense, and smell, however. Intelligence is still going to be something that we just don't know. Living animals are also very complex, and we always just think like, oh, it's just a crow, it's just going to be just minding its own business. But they can actually perform very unique tools and tasks, however.
It's true. And honestly, even if T Rex intelligence was only comparable to that of a crocodile, crocodiles are still pretty clever animals.
Oh, definitely.
And
Like,
they can even form bonds with humans on occasion. I don't know if you've heard the story of that crocodile in Costa Rica that this guy, he saved it from injury and then it followed him around for like the next 20 years, protected him from other crocodiles. Crazy, crazy stuff. So if T Rex was capable of that kind of bonding with an individual human, facial recognition, even, that would be incredible on its own.
yeah, crocodilians are very unique, however. And the one thing I will definitely say is that, especially when you look at people who own crocodilians as pets, but more like as a support animal. Like I remember this one man in Florida, he actually has a pet alligator as a support animal, and I just thought that was
Florida
very
man.
cute. Yeah, and not to mention crocodilians, they can also be resourceful. Like I remember seeing a video of an alligator just climb a fence. I'm like, they can climb a fence? That's just wow, I guess nature is evolving.
Yeah, that's not something you imagine an alligator doing.
Yeah.
Okay, looks like we have a related question. So, assuming that T Rex had primate intelligence, what could we imagine that they would be able to use to their advantage?
So, assuming that T-Rex had primate intelligence, it probably would have been more good at arranging, coordinating pack hunting. So, we always say that, oh, pack hunting is still more of a hypothesis or just very complex. So we can't really assess that. We always go with mob behavior instead. But assuming that theropods had primate intelligence, they probably would have been good at coordinating hunting and probably would have established a unique culture within their family.
Yeah, and that's a terrifying thought too. I think they highlighted that really well in the season 2 of Prehistoric Planet, where they
Mhm.
had the two T Rexes that were coordinating their attacks against the Edmontosaurus herd. That's the sort of thing that they probably would have been capable of in that
Yeah.
scenario. What is the closest theropod to the Jurassic Park velociraptors in location and size?
So are they talking about the velociraptors from the movie, or maybe more like when Alan Grant had found that one velociraptor skeleton?
It looks like there was a clarification. The Montana ones.
Oh, okay, the Montana one. So The first thing that comes to mind would be Dakota Raptor. It's a large dromaeosaur that's found in the Hell Creek. However, some paleontologists will usually debate about its validity. I know that like the fricula was did belong from that of a turtle, however, but some of the parts may still be Dakota Raptor, however. But in terms of one that would probably be more closer to that of the raptors in Jurassic Park, I go with Utah Raptor. It's big, it's massive, it's very bulky, however.
Utahraptor is so cool.
Yes.
From Tyrannotherium, do you think that Spinosaurus's sail could be used as a form of defense against Carcharodontosaurus?
We're not too sure about what the sale would have been used for. I would love to see someone do histology on the neural spines of Spinosaurus just to see what it was doing, however, and probably compare that with, let's say, maybe a basilisk or probably Dimetrodon. But I could imagine Spinosaurus would have used its sail more for like as recognition or probably to make itself look big, however.
That would be pretty intimidating. Again, from Tyrannotherium, do all theropods have a high metabolism?
I love this question because there was a study that was done back in 2021 by Mike Dimick and colleagues where they had done histology and also used it to assess the growth rate of different theropods. And so, in their findings, they found that T Rex and other large Carcharodontosaurus like Mapusaurus, they were able to grow up very fast and also were able to attain a very high body mass. But when looking at Spinosaurus and other Abelosaurus, however, they were kind of more gradual. So they were able to attain a high body mass very slow, however. But you could imagine, like, let's say, oh, T Rex probably would have reached a large adult size at the age of 18 or 20, however, and also very bulky. But for Spinosaurus, it didn't really reach like its full size until like probably age 50, however.
Which is crazy to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, like a 50-year-old theropod? That is very interesting.
Man, that really just lends itself to some cool narrative situations that you could put into a documentary.
Oh, definitely. It's kind of like the probably like how a prehistoric planet where they just focused on Spinosaurus, but the most tragic thing would have been like, oh, that Spinosaurus was 50 years old. So it was more like a senior citizen.
Yeah. And of course, there's the possibility that a lot of theropods experienced close to indeterminate growth. They would have kept growing throughout their lifetimes until they were completely fused.
Yeah.
So the really old theropods would have gotten really, really big.
Terrifying too. In fact, I remember at SVP there was a study done by Dave Hone and I think Jordan Mallon, where they were
Yeah.
assessing hypothetical body size of T Rex, and they found that T Rex could probably reach like a very large body size and even like a very body mass too. So it just shows like there was never a ceiling for dinosaurs.
Yeah. If I keep saying this on the channel over and over again, but it keeps becoming more true. Nature, especially ancient nature, is always going to surprise us, and it's always going to break the limits that we try to put on it.
Oh, definitely.
And yeah, I'm actually working on a terrestrial size limit paper that Mike Taylor's offered to help with, and so that's going to be pretty fun.
Awesome.
I won't spoil too much. It's probably not going to come out until sometime next year, but there's some crazy numbers. Terrestrial vertebrates could get a lot bigger than we think.
Wow. Interesting. Can't wait to see
I'm
it.
excited to be able to share that with y'all. Okay, from Y79 with a question mark. Do you think flesh grazing in Carcharodontosaurids, where they didn't kill the sauropods they were attacking, was likely or not? So, like them following a large sauropod, taking chunks out, sort of like treating the sauropod as a moving farm, essentially, for meat.
Yeah, it's possible, however. It's possible. So in one of those scenarios, they probably would have still have just been grazing off the flesh, however, and would have just waited for a sauropod to just die from shock and blood loss. Because I will tell you one thing, I would probably be more scared of a large Carcharodontosaur feeding on me than a giant T-Rex. At least I know with T-Rex, it'd be painful, but at least it's quick. Carcharodontosaurus, you're just bleeding and you're just losing flesh as you're just walking, and you're just kind of like, is it over? And then the animal just died from shock and blood loss.
Yeah, not a good way to go out. I'd rather be, crushed like that by a T-Rex bite than harvested a bit at a time by a Carcharodontosaurid.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a really interesting question with genetics. Is it a possibility that dinosaurs had mutations such as albinism?
That is a very good one. So I don't study genetics, but we always do see genetic disorders in living animals today. How in living animals today. So in terms of albinism, that would be a very unique thing to see, especially when it comes to a predator-prey relationship. Like, imagine if you would like say a large dinosaur that's usually best that's usually best at camouflage, but it's just pure white. However, that would just be very much like a unique feature, but also more like a really good standout.
That would be really interesting because I know that in alligators we have albino alligators, we have leucistic alligators. I've seen a few in person and they're beautiful. They're absolutely amazing animals.
Very beautiful.
And they're pretty closely related to dinosaurs too. So I think that seems like a pretty decent analog for suggesting that that's likely happened. Whether or not those animals would be successful is an entirely different question, but it probably did happen genetically.
Right.
Looks like Pokesaurus wanted some clarification on that growth curve for theropods we were talking about earlier. For how fast did Tyrannosaurus grow?
So one way we can assess the growth of Tyrannosaurus would be using histology. So this can be done by cutting into the bones with a saw and also using a special magnifying glass. And we were able to see that T-Rex just went through a very fast exponential growth, however. So starting from age 14 to 18 or 20, it was able to pack on body mass each time or every day.
That's insane.
Very nice.
Imagine gaining multiple pounds per day for 4 or 5 years.
And then becoming a giant.
That'd be crazy. Yeah, and they did. They got bigger than any other terrestrial predator we know about. Okay, we're coming up on the top of the hour, so we're probably just going to take a couple more questions. I'll just go through and look at a couple that are more feeding related.
Sure.
So, Tyrannotherium, could a Tyrannosaurus bite the face off of its prey? I know that sometimes crocodiles have been known to bite zebras' faces off, so maybe Tyrannosaurus could do the same.
Yes, that is very accurate. So we have found bite marks on the frills of Triceratops and other ceratopsians. And I believe there was a study or a paper done by Denver Fowler where they were able to see that based on this, T-Rex probably would have had the enough jaw and neck muscle power to be able to just rip the head off of a Triceratops clean off with little to no ease. With little to no effort.
Remember, I the first time I saw that art that Mark Whitten did, where it's
Oh,
grabbing the
yeah.
frill of the Triceratops and just decapitating it without even biting the neck, just by
Yeah.
pulling the frill and just decapitating it through sheer force of its neck is absolutely insane.
Yeah.
T-Rex is the coolest.
It is.
Just got to say that. Okay, and last question. I think this is one that you're going to be uniquely suited to answer, actually. From Lagiacris the Terminator. Is there anything on the axe-jawed Allosaurus thing?
Oh, yeah. So there was a hypothesis done where Allosaurus could open its mouth very wide and it just would have been just whacking at it like a giant pickaxe. I know that another couple of biomechanics analysis have shown that it probably would have done more harm to the Allosaurus, however, because imagine if you would just open up your jaw very wide and just launch full force. You would be damaging yourself a lot, however, and that would not be really good.
That would hurt pretty bad, especially if you're biting down on the sort of prey that Allosaurids coexisted with. If you're ramming your chin into a Stegosaurus dorsal plate, it's not
Yeah.
going to feel good.
Yeah. Basically broken jaw Allosaurus, but worse.
Okay, awesome. Well, this has been a fantastic live stream. I know I've had a ton of fun. I think everybody else has too. Evan, do you have any, parting words, bits of advice for the rest of us aspiring paleontologists?
Yeah, so one thing I will say is that for those who still want to continue being a paleontologist, always remember to volunteer at museums, fossil prep labs, get in contact with other paleontologists. Just feel free to look to see what talks they are doing, and also ask if you can have any involvement in their lab or any type of way at the museum.
Fantastic feedback. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Evan, for being a part of the channel. This has been really awesome, and thank you for everybody else who tuned in. We'll see you next time. Have a good one, everybody.